So I am very excited to be joined today by Nina Christian. Nina is an award-winning global branding and marketing expert. She's a seasoned marketer who's built multiple businesses over the past 20 years, and that's including a successful exit and an award-winning marketing agency. Nina, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I'm really looking forward to our chat.
It is lovely to be with you today.
Nina, before we jump into our chat, could you perhaps give our listeners a bit of an overview about you, your journey, your career, and experience and what you do currently?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in marketing for 28 years now. It sounds like a long time. I'm sure many of your listeners have are of a similar vintage. But I did start my marketing career back in the 90s doing tourism marketing and sports marketing. And by the age of 25, I was the general manager of an internationally run sports marketing agency that managed projects for Olympic Games and Commonwealth Games and major events on behalf of sports sponsorships and governments and corporations, etc. So I had a pretty good head start pretty early. And loved that, but also had this hankering to start my own business as well. So in 2000, rather than pursuing a corporate career and going into the big brands after that, I actually decided to start my own agency, which I did in the year 2000, which I ran for about 20 years. Until I decided I wanted to pursue a different direction. So I had different iterations of that agency because marketing has changed a lot in 20 years. So going from a full service marketing agency to a focus on major events, and also moving into more of a content marketing and social media focus at the time. So it's seen different seasons and, worked with a lot of different styles of marketers, mentored many marketers that came up through the ranks during that time that have gone on to amazing things themselves. And these days, I spend most of my time mentoring and training marketers, business owners, corporate marketing teams, agencies, CMOs, really around how marketing is changing and how they can be across that. And a big part of that is obviously what we're going to be talking about today, which is around branding and personal branding as well, and the art of marketing yourself, which ironically comes particularly difficult to many marketers.
It really does. I think that is one of the hardest things to do when you're going on that journey. It's that personal sort of brand journey.
Yeah, and I'll say to any marketers listening into this from the outset, I hear you, I feel you. When I started marketing myself more actively, going back probably about 6 years ago, I had all the feels that a lot of marketers have, and we're going to dive into a lot of that today and how I've overcome it and, some of the things that you can do to get started. But it definitely is something that people have a lot of resistance around. And in the past, they never really had to do so much, but it's very different marketing big brands or your employer's brand or client's brand. When it comes to marketing yourself, it's challenging, A, because it's tough to put yourself out there, and B, because we put such high expectations on ourselves because of the level of service we expect. And that can be hard as well. So we'll dive into that a little bit later too.
Oh, I cannot wait to start this chat, Nina. It's an area I'm so passionate about, and I love your background. It's so varied, and I think there's so much value there. You having been in this space for so long, but having seen it evolve. And how we got to chatting was I actually saw a post online on LinkedIn, and it resonated with me. It made me feel a certain way, and I just delved in. I didn't do a lot of research. I looked at the website, looked at your LinkedIn profile, and I got a real sense of who you were. And I thought, that's what a good personal brand is. Get an actual feel for the person. You feel like you actually know them. It's very authentic. So I'm very excited for this chat.
Oh, thank you. I love that, Ez. If I can just inject a comment there, you've made my day because, and not just because you invited me to do a podcast. That's not the bit that made my day. The bit that made my day is the fact that what you saw from what I had published and posted, etc., made you feel something. And for me, that's the holy grail of where I feel marketing is at the moment and how we need to communicate as brands. It's way less about the curated narrative and the polished and perfect and all of that, and very raw about, being empathetic and tapping in at an emotional level to feelings. And so the art and science of doing that as a personal brand is something that needs to be developed. But that's my ultimate intention. When I show up, I really want people to feel. So the fact that you actually called that out and mentioned it, I absolutely love it. Thank you, Ez.
Oh, no, my pleasure. And it was so nice. And we're going to go into this as one of the questions about creating an authentic brand. When you actually then speak to that person, that's the exact same experience that I'm getting with you, and then in our initial call as well. I reckon we're going to have to wrangle ourselves then, Nina, because we could talk about this for hours.
Over to you.
Peter, my first question to you, and I guess it kind of sets the tone of our conversation, is, I mean, we're hearing a lot of talk around personal brands. There's a lot of chatter around building a personal brand. And my question to you is sort of how has this evolved over the last, say, 10 years? Because 10 years ago, when I joined Recruitment, it was all about the company brand. I worked for a big brand, and it was always, they were constantly pushing out their company brand. But we had no one in the business had their own personal brand. It actually was not allowed. You couldn't post anything unless the company agreed to it. And that's very different now in my experience. But yeah, I would love your thoughts on how you feel it's sort of changed, evolved over the last 10 years.
Absolutely. And you're right. There wasn't a need 10 years ago to have a personal brand, or it was just in its very embryonic stages. Well, look, in a sense of having it as a necessity, or as that it's now a thing. I mean, we have had them, of course, in the past without necessarily calling it that. And but the need for it is very different. Like, I remember I also had a tech startup back in the .com boom, which I was growing in the early 2000s. And I remember back then very clearly not wanting publicity, not wanting limelight. And I would do interviews about that brand, on the condition that they wouldn't publish my photo or even my name sometimes, which kind of got me into hot water with journalists sometimes, saying, you want us to promote your stuff, but not you. But in any case, I by and large got away with it, but that wouldn't happen now, because everyone wants to know more than what does the brand do. It's like, who's behind the brand and why did they start it and what did they do? Now, that's obviously in a very like the startup and entrepreneurial context, but apply that to the corporate context. It's exactly that. There's so many similarities there, in that people don't want to just know what a particular organization does. They want to know what do the people inside the organization, and what makes them tick? What do they stand for? What's the vibe like? What's the essence of that organization? And so instead of hiding behind logos and veneers and brochures and websites, they aren't cutting the mustard anymore. People are connecting with the people inside the brand. And what that means for organizations is that to be relevant and connect with the people they most want to do business with, they need to have their people, out there with a brand. And this does present a challenge for people who haven't, necessarily strategically crafted and built a brand before, but it also represents a lot of opportunity. So the reality is, these days now, everybody has a brand. It's just how much are you in control of that, and how much are you just letting it slide and just happen without your influence? Mm-hmm. And yeah, that's probably the big shift.
Do you think, Nina, and I've just thought of this while you were talking, do you think the focus on the personal brand and the consumer wanting to know more about the people within the business is as a result of one, social media, perhaps, where everyone's showcasing everything about themselves online? Therefore, we want to get to know people more in a professional sense, and then like the whole reality TV thing and people being on screen all the time, opening up and showing themselves and their lives. Do you reckon there's any sort of correlation there?
I do. I think, yes, I think that obviously the rise of social media and the proliferation of that has got us used to getting to know people. But I also think that there's part of the collective way we have changed in the way we think and relate to brands, where we crave authenticity and we crave connection, and we get that we can't connect with a logo or an institution in the same way that we can with people. And we also have had our trust massively affected, and many people, disenfranchised by brands, by actions and things like that. And so there's a need, like there's a very almost primal need or instinctive desire to connect with the people and base a trust decision on that. And and that's where it becomes a really interesting conversation, because it's tough for brands, and also a lot of people don't know how to show up in that way as well. So we're going to get into the weeds around and into the tactics and details of some of that today.
I love that you mentioned the trust piece, and I'm completely with you. And if you work with individuals, we work with multiple businesses around personal brand, what sort of journey does that typically take for those individuals that you work with?
Yeah. So I would say maybe a good way to start, well, I guess your question, and then I'll kind of give a slightly rephrased version of that. I think that would maybe help me explain it as well. So the journey obviously is, first of all, like awareness, realizing that you need to do it, and then thinking through how you're going to do it, obviously following through on that, realizing that it is going to be an experimentary and evolutionary process, and that you will go and refine and iterate over time. And as you do that, you will build your confidence and get clearer on your messaging and your value proposition to the marketplace. And that's the same whether you're a business owner, whether you're a business leader, whether you're an employee, you have a value proposition to the marketplace and how you share and communicate that. So that would be the typical journey. I feel like when it comes to getting started, the things that are really, really important to get clear on are because it's really easy just to follow a system or a process or do what someone's told you to do, but ultimately that's not going to make you feel good, and you're not going to stick at it because it's probably not going to be successful either, because it's not coming from within you. The most successful personal brands have a very high level of integrity and authenticity, because they show up as they are. It's less about the trying to be and more about the being. So obviously that is a journey to get to that place where you just show up and be, and a lot of that is the inner work around the confidence. But from a very practical perspective, when you're just getting started to build a personal brand as a marketer, the two questions that I would really encourage people to ask themselves is, number one, what do you want to be known for? And that is probably the number one question that will inform your approach and what you do and how you position yourself as a brand. And also, related to that, equally important is, how do you want to make people feel? Which comes back to what we talked about at the top, and that's going to inform your approach and your content and your focus areas and how you show up and where and why and what you say and what you do, if we're talking about social media. But also remembering that your brand extends way beyond, and your personal brand extends way beyond social media. It's everything around your personality, your voice, your visual, how you're coming across visually. It's about the values and the what you're saying and the congruency and the alignment of all of that. And then it's also about the pure value that you're delivering. So like from a brand promise perspective, do you do what you say you do? Is your word in integrity? And then all of your content, your interactions, your engagements with people on the phone, at events, in person, in the office, outside of the office, this all mixes into your personal brand. And so really thinking about, okay, how do you make people feel in life when you just show up as a person? Like, how do your friends and family, what do they feel that you emanate? How could you, what elements would you like to take that and translate that into your business context? Because when you can find those touch points and really zero in on those things and get clever, strategic, and creative around how you express that, that's when you really have a blank canvas of opportunity to create something that's really beautiful and different, but also in complete integrity and alignment with who you are as a person.
I love that, Nina. I've been madly writing notes whilst you were talking, but completely resonate. And I think it's that brand promise that really resonated, and what do you want to be known for? Because I have seen, I mean, I'm connected with around 9,000 people on LinkedIn, and you see, and I know quite a lot of them because I've been on some of their courses or we've recruited for them. And it's quite clear to see when someone has curated a personal brand versus actually authentically being themselves, knowing and having done that inner work, I think is really important. And you mentioned that, having done the inner work to go, well, actually, how do I show up in the world? The personal brand and understanding the personal brand isn't just a professional veneer that you put out to the world on social media, and that's what it's where it stops. It has to be authentic to you. It's in all of the interactions that you have on the phone, in person. How do you show up with friends? How do you make people feel? That is incredibly important from a personal brand perspective, I think. And I think, I mean, do you struggle with that with clients, Nina, that perhaps haven't gone on the personal brand journey as yet, and they come to you and go, okay, cool, what is this? Is that a struggle with clients and sort of educating them?
All the time. And, you know, to give you an example, I'll give you two examples actually. So a lot of people, when they come to me, they come because, you know, I might be known for my, you know, content, how I help people do content or content systems, or, you know, having really systematizing marketing in a way that feels really, really good and authentic, right? And using that to build your brand, and, you know, positioning yourself out there as a thought leader, even if you're, you know, like have a field of expertise that might be as an employee or corporate, or you're a business owner or something like that. There's obviously something that, you know, that's going to be helpful to the world, and there's a process of getting it out. And that is a process, and that's something that I would, you know, call myself an expert in. However, before we get to that, and before we get to the, you know, putting all the marketing out there and the positioning and the messaging and all of that, it is this thing that you really need to know who you are and what you stand for. And to your point, it is the inner work. And so I actually have a process that I make people go through, because it's a classic case of, you know, what you put in is what you get out. And if you don't have the right ingredients going in to how you're expressing yourself in the marketplace, then what's coming out will be, won't have that really powerful soul attached to it. And that's the differentiating factor between, you know, content and marketing these days. What I believe is foundational and going to be the differentiating factor in the future. It's marketing that makes people feel good, marketing that people can connect with. And to really do that, has to be this level of authenticity just oozing through everything. And for that to happen, you really need to be authentic. You need to, you know, really like be true to yourself. But obviously, to be true to yourself, you need to know yourself. And I take people through a process of, you know, sometimes it's a little bit like stretching, but going into a place of extracting what makes you different and what makes you unique, and how can you put words on that, and how can you put images on that. And once you actually feel that and you start to do it consciously, then you get to a point where it can start to be unconscious. And so that can be a challenging process, but if you don't go through it, you miss the opportunity to truly connect with your audience at a deeper level. So that's the first point that I wanted to say. And the second point I would say to that is that just like humans have personalities, we show up in different ways in different contexts. That's something else that audiences and customers are looking for in brands these days, which is a huge opportunity as well. So we don't want to just see like the same stuff over again. We want to see different expressions of that personality, but that is done in a way that's congruent and true to the brand. And to give you an example, like you, for example, would show up differently in your office when you're meeting with a client, to if you are speaking to a bunch of recruiters, to if you were having, if you play golf, I don't know, whatever you do for sport, for fun, with some mates on the weekend versus at the family barbecue on Christmas. It's the same as, but you're going to show up in different personalities in different contexts. And so there's huge opportunities at the moment for brands and personal brands, especially to be showing up and injecting that different style of personality and having fun with it. And so, yeah, when you realize that you can do that and be okay with it, it starts to become effortless and less of a burden, because you just have to show up and be you, if that makes sense. So yeah, they would be two things that I would offer around the thing of, okay, how do you connect with audiences using a personal brand.
Well, it's so good to hear from you, Nina, that it is a challenge for others, because I think I went on this personal branding journey when I started my business a few years ago, and you mentioned it's challenging often for the people that you work with, and I found that part actually was the hardest, and it was really, really confronting, because you're asking yourself these questions about who you actually are, how you show up in the world, and it can be quite confronting, and talking to yourself about what your actual values are and why they're your values, where they come from. That work for me was probably the hardest. It was the starting point.
Because it goes to the core of your identity. This is way beyond marketing and way beyond personal branding. This goes to, the purpose and, your why and how you're showing up and asking those bigger questions. And it's also very empowering, because when you start to see the lens of, well, why am I here and what is the purpose and how does this play the part in it? They are really big questions, and they go to the core of our identity and who we are as people. But when we are courageous enough to have those conversations, oh my gosh, they just open up the door for so much impact to flow through you in a far more effortless way. And this is what I love, because you go from like struggling and striving to have impact to literally just sitting in that, emanating it, and being the impact that you want to have in the world.
Love that. What my next question is just a little bit more broader around sort of audience and consumer behaviors, and how in your sort of experience you have seen them sort of change, and how it's sort of overall been affected brand communications, marketing on a more broader sense.
Yep. Okay, so many changes. And I can just say, look, even in the last 12 months, forget 10 years, 2 years ago, audiences were different. 12 months ago, audiences different. So we're recording this in 2022. And already I would just say, and we were talking about this a little bit even before we started the podcast, you and I personally, just what we're noticing and observing around people that we deal with, and the level of intensity and fatigue that a lot of people are struggling with. And so I'd lead with that as one thing. I've got a few points for you around how audiences are changing, but just really being cognizant that people are very mentally overloaded and full at the moment. And it's not just one thing. It's not just the pandemic. It's not just the political situation. It's not just, the changing, technological environment. It's everything all mixed in together, plus family, plus relationships, plus everything. And so when it comes to work and how we are communicating with audiences, it's so important to remember people are just like, they're just struggling. People are making big decisions like going off social media for mental health reasons. They're prioritizing their well-being and mental health. So that's one thing. Another really big shift is that people are a lot more, let's call it, savvy to marketing and communications. They're a lot more skeptical. They have very finely attuned BS detectors. That's what I like to call them, where their brain, a la the first point, is trying to keep them safe by screening out any unnecessary messaging. And so anything that doesn't land or doesn't resonate, or doesn't make them feel good, is kind of going out. And so that in itself has also brought in a third shift around, I feel like they wanting at the moment positive, hope inspiring, uplifting messaging through marketing, and to consume with brands that are going to make them feel good, coming back to that emotional connection again. So a lot of what was working in marketing previously, not that I necessarily agree, but it was tactic that was used by many brands and very effective around fear and scarcity and FOMO and all of that. That's not the type of marketing that lands and resonates in this season. The way I like to kind of put imagery around it, it's like, can you kind of give people a hug with your marketing? They're just burnt out, they're tired, they're overloaded, they got family stuff going on and everything's changing, and from week to week there's some new crisis that we're all dealing with, and our brains are overloaded. Just give us some relief and give us a hug. And so that's another thing. And then obviously, something that's been in the works for a while, coming back to the savviness, is that people are very hesitant to want to be sold to. They want to do things on their own terms, but they're open to being helped and they're open to being entertained. So if you're always thinking about, if my people in my audience or my community, those in my network, my sphere, they're overloaded, how can I be of service to them? How can I make their life easier? How can I make their day better? And coming at that angle in your marketing and even in your personal branding, because in your personal branding, you're going to be talking about, what you do or some of the things that you stand for, you believe. So always putting it through that lens of, is this going to make my audience feel good? And so they would be a few points that I would say kind of have collectively facilitated a really, really big shift in how consumer behavior has changed in the last 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because my initial question to you was over the last 10 years, but you're so right. It literally is changing so rapidly. And I think there'd be a million things you could talk of in terms of the change from 10 years ago. But yeah, you're so right. It is that giving back piece. It's the feel good, it's the emotional connection that, to us at Spencer Lane, has been not a tactic we've used, Nina, but I think that just naturally came because that's what our values are. We're always giving back, and that for us works really well. An example of that was last year, which we were all in the thick of lockdowns in Melbourne. I was like, we all need personal connections. Everyone's sat at home, they can't leave their 5K radiuses. So I thought, let's do something that sort of runs within our values and giving back when we can. So we organised a fun run, and we called it World Around Melbourne. And the idea was we'd get 20 business owners to run this globe 5Ks around their suburb and pass it on to someone else. Thinking at the time, I'll do it because I'm going to raise money for Beyond Blue, but not really expecting business owners to put their hands up. When we released it and sent the invites out to a few business owners, every single one said 100% we're so behind this. And they all personally got behind the fundraising. We ended up with, the goal was $5,000. We ended up raising around 28.
Yes.
But it was that whole community aspect. It was the feel good. People wanted to be part of something. It was the emotional connection. And yeah, it's exactly what you were sort of talking about, I guess.
Yeah. And one just to kind of, I guess, elaborate on that point, in another thing that we're going into now is a lot of big economic shifts in the way that, is A, determining how brands show up, and B, how people engage in buying decisions, a lot more risk averse, a lot more cautious. And so it's really a time for marketers, so again, whether it's a business brand or a personal brand, to think, okay, so just because people might be making different buying decisions in this season, or maybe they are buying less of that or withholding that, or whatever it is, that's not necessarily the time. It doesn't mean you don't show up and be of service, because this is a time where you can really build so much in relational equity by simply just being who you are and helping. And that will serve you as a brand, again, business or personal. It will serve you because people will remember just how you showed up and served in those times. So it is, while a lot of people might start taking the foot off the accelerator for marketing in leaner seasons, it is really an opportunity for brands to show up and just be there for people in a way that is going to be meaningful, that they can, that they will recall later on.
That's so true, Nina. I mean, I look back at all of our clients and through COVID, when most businesses were sort of stalling, the ones that were outwardly helping their communities of customers without asking for anything back, and they're continuously doing it through the tough times, they are on such a huge upward trajectory comparative to the other businesses that didn't do anything in those leaner times. And it's so easy just to do that comparison and go, well, that works. And it, Dina, what would you say are the things to consider when you're sort of starting out on a personal brand journey? We've obviously talked a little bit about the sort of looking inward and really delving deep and asking yourself those questions. But what are the key things to consider or to do? Because most of our audience will be senior marketers or business owners. What would your advice be there when starting out on a personal brand journey?
Yeah, so let's make this question really tactical and practical, because we've talked big picture, we've talked deep mindset, inner work. Now let's just put some actions to it. So the first thing, and I will reiterate one point just because it is going to be very practical, is it's so important. I can't get on to the next point without talking about this one. It's so important to be super clear what you want to be known for, and to have some sort of, and I would encourage people to make that strategically linked, to have a purpose to what it is in their role or their future role or their business or whatever that strategic application is going to be for you. How you want to be known in the marketplace is really important to start. The liberating thing, however, is that you don't have to be locked into that forever. And that when you build a personal brand, it is, and you do it the right way, when it's built around the stuff that we were talking about earlier, which is the you and what makes you different. You're literally just putting different lenses and different applications on that. But the core of it means you can shift and change and pivot as you want to and as you need to. And that's been my experience over many, many years, like pushing my brand in this direction. And now I want to do it in this way. So getting clear on what you want to be known for in a particular season to start, and to make it really easy and really concrete, I encourage people to think about it in a 90-day increment and just say, because that's the amount of time which, if you're going to start to, put stuff out there and be more visible, 90 to 120 days is basically how long it takes for you to get known for something. Not necessarily, dominate the world, but actually build out something that people will recognize you. And when you're smart and strategic with your messaging, you can become known for something. It's also the amount of time that you could pivot from being known for one thing to something else. Or it could be, so if you're not known for, you're not active at all on a personal brand front, it could be the time that takes you to actually get your, put your stake in the ground and become known for something. Or if you're known in a personal brand, in a business brand capacity, to actually start to build more of a personal brand, or vice versa. So that's a really good time container to think about. And then thinking, what do you want people to know about you after those 90 days, and reverse engineer from that. And the next thing I will say is really important. Consistency is like the bedrock of building a personal brand. And the biggest mistake that I see is people getting all fired up and excited and motivated and going out hammer and tong and, posting every day and being on multiple platforms and making all these announcements to the world. I'm here and I'm going to be doing this and blah, blah, blah. And then 3-4 months later, like, we don't see them again, and we go. And I just think this is not just not positive for your brand, it's actually negative. Because if you go out doing too much too soon and then you cannot sustain it, that has a detrimental effect, because obviously then there's a, how good are you at following through? There's a lot of subconscious, is this person around for for the long haul. So I would encourage people to start small and build up from there. Think about what is going to be sustainable for you for 90 days. And I always encourage my clients to do to layer and to do something consistently for at least a month or two before you add anything else into that. It's very easy to add, but it's very difficult to add new things when you've got multiple plates spinning. So thinking about what is something that you could realistically do consistently for 90 days and just starting small. Then obviously a few practical considerations around that. I think, well, you know, what comes naturally for you? You know, do you enjoy writing? Do you enjoy video? Do you enjoy audio? Do you enjoy collaborating as part of events? What feels good to you and what lights you up? If you've never done a video before, it's probably going to be very challenging to have a 100% pure video-based strategy to build your personal brand. You might want to start gently and ease into that. So thinking about what platform comes good to you, and also where do you like to hang out? Because while social media isn't going to be the be all and end all of a personal brand, most definitely it isn't. It's the easiest way to start and build something. And so thinking about not just where you're going to post, but where do you like to hang out and actually build relationships? And that's a whole nother I guess, topic to, you know, potentially explore. But even in the personal branding space, it's worth a mention. You know, I talk about the 3 ways to build a brand that are critical in our current environment. One is to be front of mind, which is, you know, pushing out content in different places and having some sort of an omnipresent strategy or place where people are seeing you. The other is to be findable, so that being in places where if they are going to look for the very thing that you do, that you will show up. And the third one is to have fans who are actually sharing and promoting what it is you do. And coming back to the trust factor, that's huge at the moment. And so I'm encouraging my clients really to go really, really deep on building collaborations and JVs and partnerships, and looking at how you can position yourself as a brand to be highly shareable, not just because of, you know, the services that you provide, but if you want to build your brand, like what content are you putting out and what does your brand deliver, just so that people will want to engage with you. And so if you're taking that approach, thinking about what platforms you enjoy hanging out on are going to make that whole journey so much easier for you. And, you know, I'm all about the ease and the efficiency. So they would be a few very practical tips for people who are thinking about, where do I start with actually building my personal brand?
Where were you 3 years ago, Nina? I could have done with those practical tips. You know, one that really resonated with me is that consistency and realistic consistency. And you mentioned those people that you see that just completely push it really hard for 2 months and they disappear. And I've seen so many people like that. You mentioned it can be detrimental to your brand. And I just wrote that down going, question more.
Yep.
Is it that people would then go, well, they're no longer around, and I used to say them, they're no longer around, are they doing what they used to be doing? What can you
Well, they're
elaborate
flaky,
on that?
they're inconsistent, they don't have a strong value proposition, they don't know who they are, they're trying to, you know, but they're unsure. And so if you give off a thing of you're unsure, then that doesn't instill confidence for other people to have in you. So that's one thing. And just definitely, like, where are you? And especially if you are going to shift or transition or pivot, and that's going to be inevitable for all of us, because none of us are going to be doing the same thing in 3 years or 5 years that we are now exactly. But what the beauty of being consistent is that the transition happens, but it happens in a gentle and evolving and iterative way. And it's like people see the growth and people get to feel like they're part of the transition, and that very thing in itself helps them buy into your brand, where they get to follow the transition. Whereas when people are they see you for one thing and then you take a hiatus, and it's different, you know, if you're going off the grid for health reasons or family reasons or things like that, there's no judgment there, and just be really upfront and communicate that. and there's a lot of grace for that in this period of time as well. But I'm talking about, people come up and they're doing this role, or they want to be an industry leader and, the expert in this area. And then we don't see them for a while. And then they just kind of coming out, in a kind of different area. Then people feel more marketed to, as opposed to being brought along the journey. And I think, just really giving people credit that they're smart, they're watching you, and they want to care, but they do care at the end of the day. And can you give them something to care about? If that's you changing, well, that's okay. That gives them permission to explore change for themselves as well. If you did something and it didn't really work, then not just talk about the fact that it didn't work. Maybe can you share some lessons or some insights that you got around why? And that helps people buy into you as a brand. And then just bring people along for the journey.
Really, really valuable advice there, Nina. Do you think the lack of consistency, I mean, in my experience, just the last follow-up on this, the lack of consistency in my experience when I'm working with business owners on certain things, and occasionally we'll talk about personal brand, and they'll go, yeah, we tried that for 2 months, it didn't work, so we stopped it. Do you think that it's the...
I laugh. I tried it for personal brand for 2 months. I just told everyone, like, it takes you at least 3 to 4 months to even get on people's radar. So yeah.
I think it's that feeling of, and I'd love you to reiterate that to anyone listening, that it's not a quick fix or a quick win environment. You're not going to win new customers or whatever you're trying to win, build more sales in 2 months, in 3 months. This is a long-term approach.
It is. And it's, one of the things that is the beauty of this is that when you do it, you can actually leverage time and have time working for you, when in so many areas of our life, we feel like time works against us. Whereas when we are actually, building relationships and putting out content, when we do it consistently, and it doesn't have to be at a high level, it can just be at a low but consistent level, that the time that you've been doing it, it's like compound interest. It actually works for you over the long term. And so, yes, it's like, planting a field. You need to plant the seeds, and then you need to water it, and then you need to nurture it, and then it needs the sun and the rain for those plants to actually grow and then bear fruit. You would be silly to plant the seeds and then be expecting the apples to fall off the tree in 2 months. But this is what a really big fundamental shift that's happening at the moment, that a lot of marketers, and I'm in contact with a lot of marketers globally, through my work, not just with my professional work, but also I'm the state chair in Victoria of the Australian Marketing Institute. So I'm seeing a lot of what's happening around the place in different types of marketers. And I also mentor a lot of agency owners around the world. And what they were seeing working a year or two ago is not working. And a lot of people who've relied solely on performance marketing or paid initiatives, like, people are screening out for that, and it's not effective. And those that haven't built brand equity, those that haven't built an organic marketing engine, are really suffering at the moment, because now is a harder place to start than it was 2 years ago. And to that point, if you haven't started, now's the right time to start, because in another 2 years it will be harder again. And so starting with something, even if it's small, but just doing it consistently, people will notice, and people will build relationship with you as they've seen you over time. And then you'll get to the point where people start to reach out to you, and that's when the fruit is starting to yield. But that typically happens, it can happen in 3-4 months. Like, sometimes, depending on how well known you are in your industry and how much experience you have and the value and caliber of the information you're putting out, it could happen in weeks and months. But if you don't have that presence and you're literally starting from scratch, it's realistic. Like, when I started and I didn't have a big industry profile, I knew I was going to have to be doing this consistently for a year or so at least, just to even be, starting to be a serious contender on people's radars. Now I'm in a blessed position because I've been doing consistently for so many years that even if I change direction, or even if I do something new or whatever, I've got this network of people who know me because of the brand that I've built. But that's just come through simply just showing up and doing it consistently over the years.
I would 100% agree with that, Nina. My first few months, a few years ago, I didn't have a brand presence at all. And it's exactly what you said, it's compounding when it's done with consistency. And for me, it sort of turned around at that 6 and 9 month mark. But it was phenomenal seeing all the results of, I say hard work, but it didn't feel like hard work because it was just me being me. And it's like, it didn't feel like hard work, but literally it was so
it's a decision that you made and you followed through on it.
And it was just phenomenal for my business. I mean, within 9 months, we had a humongous network, became the counsellor for our industry body across recruitment. We had a 6-month wait list for clients. It was phenomenal, the results. And so I think this is why this is going to be one of my favourite ever episodes of our podcast.
Yeah. And look, for business owners and even for employees, it's so important because if you can start building your personal brand outwardly, it really elevates your profile and visibility within the organization and marketability. And, not just for the sake of getting future jobs, it's really about being in demand and being valued for what it is that you do. And when people internally see the fruit of what you're doing, just as a brand, oh my gosh, like that you get kudos and opportunities handed to you internally, not to mention the benefits on, obviously salary and remuneration and all of that side of things. So there are so many cases for why everyone should be building a personal brand right now.
Nina, one of my last questions to you, because I'm conscious we're getting close to the hour. In your experience of working with leaders and other marketers on this personal branding journey, are there commonalities, I know I imagine they are, with regards to what holds them back from actually pulling the trigger and going, okay, this is what I'm going to do, I'm going to commit to this? And if there are, how do you work with them to overcome them?
Yes. So yes, and yes. The first thing, we said it at the outset, so worth repeating, if you're a marketer or business leader and you're really great at what you do, but you get stuck marketing yourself, you're not alone. And as I've, told you, I mentor hundreds of people in those situations and know that the feeling is common to all of them, including, world-renowned seasoned marketers who do amazing things when it comes to articulating their own value proposition, especially publicly. That is, and why they're different, that is a tough ask for them. So what I always say is, and it is coming back to what we talked about, really starts with the confidence piece, and that, people feel like, a lot of people come feeling like they're the best kept secret, like they're amazing at what they do, they're a hidden talent, they do all this stuff behind the scenes, but they don't know how to make themselves more visible, on the stage. And so the biggest challenge that I see is people not knowing what to say and how to say it. And so the antidote to that is getting clear on who you are. Sounds very, bit woo and meta, and we talked about this, identity, etc. What makes you different? What makes you you? And putting a lens over that of what you want to be known for in the next 90 days, and how does what you do relate to the role you're in, or the business you're building, or the industry you're in, and looking for angles and perspectives for how you can just talk about that. That's one antidote for that. The other challenge that I see with marketers who come in and want to build a personal brand is that their expectations are super high because they've been doing marketing for so many people for so long, and they have unrealistically high expectations on themselves. And I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt. The first few times I started writing and posting, I, had massive confidence issues. I'll say it out loud. I went and paid somebody to go and read and edit my posts, my first few blogs. And reality is they didn't need to do too much. It was more just a confidence thing because I didn't feel like it was, good enough. But once I actually did that a few times, I could see that it was. Same with my video. My first video was just like a train wreck, but I got over myself and I just started to do it more, and I got comfortable with it. And that, having 20 years of marketing experience where everything had been polished and professional, and all of a sudden we need to be in front of a camera, or we need to be behind the typewriter articulating our thoughts without a professional copywriter, or, putting something out there without necessarily the benefit of a professional designer doing everything, that can get in the head of marketers. But just knowing that you do have something amazing to say, your perspective is going to be different to anyone else's. You've got something based on your unique identity and unique experience that the world needs to hear, and just getting confident in starting to express it would be the number one thing. And then the final thing, which I'll say in 10 seconds, because I could see we're pretty much at time, is just really getting clear again on that strategy and purpose for why you're even doing that. I like to say that every piece of content needs to have a purpose, and the same is with a personal brand. When you're putting something out there, think about why you're doing it. Is it to communicate something, and how does that relate to your business? Is it to make people feel something? Is it to impart some wisdom or knowledge? Is it to make their day better? Is it to show a certain aspect of your personality that they haven't seen before? And just thinking about, it doesn't have to always lead to your business when it comes to a personal brand. On the contrary, it's really good to be multifaceted, but thinking through strategically. And if you're listening to this, you're probably a marketer or a business leader, so you can do this. So thinking strategically, why am I doing this, rather than just doing it for the sake of doing it? And when you've got a plan and you've got an objective and you've got a goal, then it makes it far easier to actually do it, and do it consistently, because you know that it's to an end goal.
I love that, Nina. You crammed in so much valuable tips there. Well done for cramming them in such a short amount of time. My last question to you, Nina, is a question that we ask all of our podcast guests, and it's kind of the question that we end with, which is, what do you know now that you wish you knew then?
Thinking about that question, and I'm going to answer it in the context of what we've been talking about today, personal brand, is that what I wish I knew then is that people are going to find me, people are going to like me, people are going to love me. The people who need to, they will find me, just for me being me. I don't have to be someone else. I don't have to be like other people. I don't have to put unrealistic standards on myself to try and be something that I'm not in order to get acceptance. And I felt very nervous, and I felt like the bar was very high when I started out. And I felt the thoughts that, a lot of people feel. And if I could tell myself something, I would say, you know what, just be you and be comfortable in you, knowing that there is something in you that the world needs, even if you can't see it yet. As you get confidence and start to speak that out, it is going to come out. And the people who are there to be helped by you, to be impacted by you, and to find their way into your world, they will find you.
What a lovely ending to our episode, Nina. You know what I'm going to call it? I'm going to say this was my favourite podcast episode that I've ever recorded.
Oh,
thank you so much, Nina. Genuinely, that was super, super valuable. I think you gave us such good practical tips, as well as an overarching sort of viewpoint on marketing and comms and branding. So really, really appreciate that. And just appreciate your time and your knowledge that you were very open to sharing. And we'll pop, for anyone who wants to reach out to Nina, we'll pop her contact and business name and LinkedIn profile in the podcast write-up, so please feel free to connect with Nina. Thanks so much again, Nina. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I so loved hanging out with you today. It was such a beautiful chat. I loved it. Thanks for your insightful questions and lovely comments, and it just felt really nice. So thank you.